The late evening buzz of the city thrummed faintly in the background as the gas station cast a fluorescent glow over its quiet surroundings. A striking black woman, draped in an elegant yellow dress, stepped out of her luxury car, her every movement exuding confidence. Her presence turned heads, not just for her style, but for the sheer authority she seemed to carry. In an area where faces were more familiar and routines predictable, her arrival was an anomaly that did not go unnoticed. Across the parking lot, the watchful eyes of a white police officer, parked in his patrol car, locked on to her. The officer's hand lingered over his radio as he observed her. To him, her demeanor didn't matter, nor did the sophistication of her car or attire. All he saw was someone he believed didn't belong. His gaze hardened, and assumptions took root. Moments later, his patrol car's lights flickered on, bathing the gas station in alternating red and blue. The woman, midway through filling her tank, turned calmly toward the interruption, her expression one of measured patience. He exited the car with authority, his badge gleaming in the dim light. "What are you doing here?" His tone carried suspicion rather than inquiry. The woman turned fully toward him, one hand resting lightly on the roof of her car, the other still holding the fuel nozzle. "Filling my tank," she said evenly, her tone polite but firm. The officer's eyes narrowed. "This isn't the kind of place someone like you just stops by," he said, his words heavy with implication. "Let me see your ID." Her lips pressed together for a moment before she set the nozzle back in place. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out her ID, handing it over without a word. The officer studied it, but the tension in his face didn't relax. "What's your business here? This doesn't seem like the route to anywhere you'd need to be." "I'm on my way to an event," she replied, her tone calm but resolute. "This gas station is public property, isn't it?" Her composure only seemed to antagonize him further. He handed back her ID with a smirk, stepping closer. "You match a description from a call we got earlier. I'm going to need you to step away from the vehicle." Her brows lifted slightly at his words. She glanced around at the growing number of onlookers, their eyes flitting between her and the officer. Some had begun recording the encounter on their phones, while others whispered to one another, their discomfort palpable. "Officer," she said, her voice steady, "I've done nothing wrong. There's no need for this to escalate." But her calm only seemed to fuel his frustration. "Step away from the car," he barked, one hand resting on his belt. The woman didn't move, her gaze steady as she met his glare. It was then that a faint sound grew louder, cutting through the tension like a blade. The low hum of engines turned into a roar as a convoy of black SUVs approached the gas station, their tinted windows reflecting the gas station's fluorescent lights. The officer glanced toward the sound, his irritation briefly giving way to confusion. The vehicles came to an abrupt stop, their doors opening in unison as several individuals in dark suits and earpieces stepped out. The woman's expression softened into a faint, knowing smile as she watched the officer's posture shift from aggressive to hesitant. "What's going on here?" one of the suited individuals asked sharply, their presence radiating authority. The officer's face paled as realization dawned. This wasn't just any woman. Her calm confidence had never been misplaced. She had expected backup all along. Her Secret Service detail had arrived. Significance, though she carried herself with quiet confidence rather than ostentation. A senior government official with years of experience navigating the complex political landscape, she was no stranger to adversity. Her career was a testament to resilience. Born into modest beginnings, she'd clawed her way into the upper echelons of public service, earning her place among the nation's most influential leaders. Her expertise in diplomacy and national security had garnered her both respect and a fair share of detractors in a male-dominated political sphere. Known for her razor-sharp intellect and unyielding poise, she had spent years fighting against systemic barriers that sought to hold her back. She didn't just shatter glass ceilings, she dismantled entire structures of bias, leaving behind a legacy of empowerment for those who would follow. Her critical role in national affairs required her to maintain a level of discretion, but her impact was undeniable. Her work, often involving sensitive matters of international diplomacy, necessitated constant protection. Although she rarely flaunted her status, a Secret Service detail shadowed her every move to ensure her safety in an increasingly volatile world. On that fateful evening, however, her detail was temporarily delayed, leaving her alone at the gas station, a situation she thought would be uneventful until the officer approached. The officer, on the other hand, was a man cut from an entirely different cloth. Sergeant Roy Carter had spent years patrolling his small-town jurisdiction with an air of self-appointed superiority. His reputation among the locals was polarizing. To some, he was a no-nonsense enforcer of the law, but to others, particularly minorities, he was a bully with a badge. Complaints of racial profiling and excessive force had followed him throughout his career, but none had ever led to meaningful consequences. His department, known for turning a blind eye to such grievances, had emboldened him to act with impunity. Carter thrived on the unchecked power his badge afforded him. He had cultivated a habit of targeting individuals who he believed wouldn't fight back, those who lacked the resources or connections to challenge his authority. To him, the woman at the gas station was no different. Her polished appearance and expensive car meant little to him. Her race alone was enough for him to perceive her as a threat. His assumptions, coupled with his bloated ego, propelled him to act without hesitation. For Carter, this was another routine interaction where he could assert his dominance and show off in front of bystanders. But for the woman, it was a reminder of the very systemic inequalities she had spent her career trying to dismantle. She had faced men like him before, men who saw her skin color before her accomplishments, who wielded their power recklessly without understanding the consequences. What Sergeant Carter couldn't have anticipated was that this interaction would be the last time his behavior went unchecked. The woman's silent composure masked an inner resolve and the knowledge that she was far from powerless. Though alone in the moment, she knew that her team, trained professionals with a mandate to protect her at all costs, was only minutes away. Her calmness was born of experience, not submission. As the officer's questions grew more aggressive and his tone more condescending, the woman's measured responses only served to escalate his frustration. But unlike his previous encounters, this one wouldn't end on his terms. Unbeknownst to him, the tide of accountability was about to sweep through, and his unchecked power was on the verge of collapse. The confrontation began innocuously enough, but quickly spiraled into a dangerous abuse of power. The woman had just finished fueling her car and was reaching for her wallet when the officer approached her, his posture rigid with authority. Without introduction, he demanded to see her identification, his eyes scanning her car and outfit with thinly veiled suspicion. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady and calm. He ignored the question and instead pointed at her credit card. "You're in a pretty expensive car. Mind telling me where you got that card?" The accusation hung in the air like a threat. A small crowd began to gather at a distance, some recording the interaction on their phones. The woman's patience, honed over years of dealing with hostility, held firm. "This is my card. And my car," she said, reaching for her phone. "I'd like to call my team to clarify any misunderstandings." The officer's face darkened. "You're not making any calls." "Hand over the card and step away from the vehicle," he barked, gripping her arm tightly. The woman winced but didn't pull away. Instead, she fixed him with a measured gaze. "You need to release me. I'm a federal employee, and your actions are inappropriate and illegal." That only seemed to stoke his anger. "Federal employee? What are you supposed to be, some kind of diplomat?" he sneered. "Don't play games with me. Let's see some real ID, if you even have it." When she didn't immediately comply, the officer began to twist her arm, forcing her to step back. Gasps rippled through the small crowd, and several bystanders shouted for him to stop. The woman remained calm despite the physical discomfort. "Officer, I'm advising you to stop. You're making a serious mistake." But the officer was too far gone, fueled by the need to assert his authority in front of an audience. "A mistake? Lady, you don't tell me what to do." The turning point came with the unmistakable sound of tires screeching. A sleek, black SUV pulled into the gas station, its tinted windows gleaming under the afternoon sun. The vehicle came to an abrupt halt, and the doors opened in unison. Out stepped 4 individuals in dark suits, their movements swift and purposeful. Their earpieces glinted as they scanned the scene, assessing the situation with precision. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of them asked, his voice carrying a calm authority that silenced the growing murmurs among the crowd. The officer froze, his grip on her arm loosening, but not letting go entirely. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his earlier bravado faltering. The agent closest to him didn't flinch. "Secret Service. Step away from the woman immediately and show me your badge." The shift in power was immediate and palpable. The officer's face turned ashen as he released the woman's arm and fumbled for his identification. I was just doing my job," he stammered, his earlier hostility replaced by a defensive tone. The agents weren't interested in excuses. They moved to position themselves protectively around the woman, their stance making it clear that she was under their jurisdiction. "Ma'am, we'll take it from here," one agent said, addressing her respectfully. The woman straightened her blazer, brushing off her arm where the officer had grabbed her. "Thank you," she said, her voice unwavering. She turned to the officer, her expression unreadable. "You should have listened." The officer, now visibly sweating, tried to explain himself. "I thought she was— Look, I didn't know who she was." One of the agents cut him off. "That's no excuse for overstepping your authority. You'll be answering for your actions." The officer's defiance crumbled entirely as the agents took his badge number and began documenting the interaction. The woman, however, remained poised, her calm demeanor unshaken by the earlier confrontation. "Ma'am, do you wish to press charges?" one agent asked. She considered it for a moment, her gaze never leaving the now disgraced officer. "For now, let's ensure he's held accountable through proper channels," she said, her words carrying the weight of someone used to wielding authority. The officer stood in stunned silence as the agents escorted him aside for further questioning. The woman, now flanked by her detail, stepped forward to address the onlookers who were still recording. "Thank you for standing by and bearing witness," she said, her voice carrying across the gas station. "Accountability matters, no matter who you are." The scene ended with the officer being led to his cruiser, his earlier arrogance replaced with a visible dread of what was to come. The crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring about the dramatic shift they had just witnessed, as the woman and her team prepared to leave the scene. As the scene unfolded, the lead Secret Service agent stepped forward, addressing the woman with a reverent tone that cut through the chaos. "Madam Secretary, are you unharmed?" he asked, his voice steady, yet filled with concern. The officer froze mid-motion, his face drained of color. His mind raced, trying to process the weight of what he'd just heard. "Madam Secretary?" The realization hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just any woman. This was a high-ranking government official, someone with power that far exceeded his own limited authority. The bystanders who had been recording erupted into cheers and gasps as the agents quickly formed a protective barrier around the woman. The once dismissive crowd now looked at her with awe and respect, their phones capturing every second of the dramatic reversal. The cop, who only moments earlier had been so sure of his dominance, now stood paralyzed, his earlier bravado replaced by a visible panic. I didn't know," the officer stammered, his voice trembling as he stumbled over his words. I mean, the lead agent didn't let him finish. "Your actions were entirely out of line, officer," he said sternly, his piercing gaze holding the officer in place. "Step away and await further instruction." "But," the officer started, his voice almost pleading now. "Enough," another agent said sharply. "This matter will be handled at the highest level. Your behavior is unacceptable." The woman, calm and composed despite the ordeal, adjusted her blazer and turned to address the agents. "I'm fine, thank you," she said evenly, though her tone carried a weight of authority that silenced even the murmurs among the crowd. She cast a measured look at the officer, her eyes narrowing slightly as she spoke. "File a formal complaint, and ensure this incident and this officer's conduct is escalated to the appropriate authorities." "Yes, ma'am," the lead agent replied without hesitation. The officer, now visibly sweating, tried one last desperate attempt at damage control. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to—" The woman cut him off with a raised hand. "Save it," she said firmly, her voice steady but cold. "Your intentions are irrelevant. Your actions speak louder." As the agents took the officer's badge number and began documenting the interaction, the crowd erupted into applause. Some bystanders approached the agents, offering their videos as evidence of what had transpired. The woman acknowledged them with a polite nod. "Thank you for capturing this," she said to the nearest onlooker. "Your vigilance ensures accountability." The scene had already started gaining traction online. Clips of the officer's aggressive behavior and the dramatic arrival of the Secret Service were spreading like wildfire, sparking outrage across social media. Comments poured in, denouncing the officer's actions and demanding justice not just for the woman, but for countless others who had faced similar profiling. As the woman prepared to leave the scene, one agent approached her. "Ma'am, the video evidence is compelling. Public opinion will demand immediate action." "Good," she replied, her tone resolute. "This isn't just about me. This is about ensuring that no one else has to endure this kind of treatment. I want a full investigation into this department and its practices." The officer, now standing alone and humiliated, was told to remain at the scene for further questioning. He glanced around nervously, fully aware that his career and potentially his freedom hung in the balance. Before stepping into her SUV, the woman turned to the crowd one last time. "Thank you for standing by and bearing witness," she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "Justice isn't just about laws. It's about holding people accountable for their actions, no matter their title or position." The crowd erupted into cheers again, chanting her title and showing their support as the SUV pulled away. In its wake, the officer was left to grapple with the consequences of his actions, the viral storm brewing against him, and the knowledge that he had misused his authority against the wrong person. The incident would go on to dominate headlines, becoming a flashpoint for conversations about systemic misconduct in law enforcement. For the woman, it was a victory not just for herself, but for the countless others whose voices often went unheard. For the officer, it was the beginning of an unavoidable reckoning. The officer's downfall was swift and unrelenting. Within hours of the video going viral, the police department announced an internal investigation into the incident. Public outcry mounted as the footage circulated across social media platforms, accompanied by headlines condemning the officer's behavior. Activists, community leaders, and even politicians weighed in, demanding accountability not just for the officer, but for the systemic issues that allowed such misconduct to persist. As evidence piled up, the investigation revealed the officer's troubling record, a history of racial profiling and complaints of excessive force, most of which had been quietly dismissed. This time, however, the pressure was too great. The department was left with no choice but to terminate him, citing gross misconduct and abuse of authority. The announcement was met with widespread approval, though many insisted that this was only the first step in a much-needed overhaul of law enforcement practices. The woman, true to her character, refused to let the matter rest there. She issued a public statement, not to celebrate the officer's firing, but to draw attention to the broader issue at hand. "This isn't about one officer," she said during a televised press conference. "This is about a system that enables prejudice and abuse. It's about ensuring that no one, no matter their race, gender, or background, has to endure what I experienced." Her calm yet forceful words resonated deeply, inspiring a wave of activism across the country. Leveraging her position as a high-ranking government official, she collaborated with lawmakers, advocacy groups, and law enforcement leaders to propose meaningful reforms. These included mandatory bias training, increased oversight of police conduct, and the creation of independent review boards to handle complaints of misconducts. Her advocacy extended beyond legislation. She met with communities affected by similar injustices, listening to their stories and amplifying their voices. Her efforts ignited a national conversation about accountability and systemic change, with many crediting her with sparking a renewed push for justice and equality. Meanwhile, the police department faced mounting pressure to rebuild trust with the public. A series of reforms were implemented, including stricter hiring practices, enhanced training programs, and a commitment to transparency. Community leaders were invited to participate in oversight committees, ensuring that the changes weren't just cosmetic, but truly transformative. For the officer, his termination marked the end of his career in law enforcement and the beginning of a reckoning he could no longer avoid. He became a cautionary tale of the consequences of unchecked prejudice, a stark reminder that abuse of power would no longer go unnoticed or unpunished. As for the woman, the incident solidified her role as a beacon of resilience and leadership. Her refusal to let anger overshadow her advocacy inspired countless individuals to stand up against discrimination in their own lives. She became a symbol of how dignity and determination could challenge and dismantle even the most entrenched injustices. In the end, what began as an act of racial profiling became a turning point in the fight for equality, proving that change, though slow, is inevitable when driven by courage and conviction. The story concludes with the woman standing on stage at a high-profile national event, her powerful presence captivating an audience of leaders, activists, and citizens. The event, focused on justice and systemic reform, serves as a platform for her to share her story and inspire meaningful change. Dressed in a sharp, yet understated suit, she speaks with a calm authority that commands respect. Accountability isn't an option. It's a necessity, she begins. It's not enough to remove a few bad actors. We must dismantle the structures that allow prejudice and injustice to thrive. Her words resonate deeply as she outlines actionable steps for ensuring that law enforcement operates with fairness and transparency. She highlights the importance of community oversight, mandatory training, and independent investigations into misconduct. Her speech goes beyond policy. She speaks to the human impact of bias and discrimination, drawing from her own experience to illustrate the pain it causes and the strength it takes to rise above it. When faced with injustice, we have two choices: let it define us, or use it to drive change. I chose the latter, and I ask you to do the same. In a modest home miles away, the former officer watches the broadcast, his face a mixture of regret and disbelief. Once confident in his untouchable authority, he now grapples with the stark reality of his downfall. His name, once synonymous with power, is now a cautionary tale. The woman's speech serves as a painful reminder of the ripple effect his actions created, not just in his life, but in the national dialogue about police reform. Back at the event, the audience rises to its feet in thunderous applause. The woman accepts the standing ovation with grace, knowing that her fight is far from over. As she steps off the stage, her team surrounds her, each member a testament to the solidarity and support that have carried her through this journey. Outside, cameras flash as she greets a crowd of supporters. Children hold signs reading "Equality for All" and "Justice Prevails," their hopeful faces a stark contrast to the anger and fear that once dominated the narrative. She pauses to speak with a young girl, offering words of encouragement. Remember, your voice matters. Never let anyone make you feel otherwise. As she heads to her car, her smile reflects the quiet confidence of someone who has turned adversity into advocacy. She knows that the road ahead is long, but the progress made thus far fuels her determination. Her legacy is no longer just about her position or title. It's about the lives she's touched and the changes she's ignited. The story closes with her car pulling away, leaving behind a scene of hope and unity. Her closing words echo in the minds of those who heard her. When faced with prejudice, rise above and let justice follow.